Every sailor knew the name. From the youngest cabin boy to the most weathered captain, the words carried the same weight. Davy Jones's locker. The final resting place for all ships and all men claimed by the sea. Pirates whispered it before battle. Merchants prayed against it during storms. And mothers of sailors dreaded ever hearing it spoken about their sons. Modern audiences know the name from Pirates of the Caribbean, a tentacle-faced captain bound to a cursed ship, ferrying souls across an endless ocean. Johnny Depp made it entertaining. Disney made it profitable. But the legend of Davy Jones is far older than any Hollywood production. It predates America itself. It predates the golden age of piracy. And the real story behind this name is darker than anything a screenwriter could invent. For over 300 years, sailors across the Atlantic world shared this belief. When a ship went down, when a man fell overboard and never surfaced, they said the same thing. He's gone to Davy Jones's locker. It was not a metaphor. It was not a joke. To the men who spent their lives on wooden ships surrounded by miles of open water, it was as real as the deck beneath their feet. The legend appeared in sea shanties sung on slave ships and merchant vessels alike. It appeared in letters home from men who would never return. It appeared in the testimony of pirates standing trial for their lives, men who feared the hangman's noose less than they feared the slow death of drowning. Something about this phrase captured a terror so profound that it persisted across centuries, across languages, across entire civilizations of seafaring men. So here is the question that matters. Was Davy Jones a real person? Was there an actual locker, an actual place where sailors believed the dead were kept? And why did this single name terrify men for 300 years, when the sea itself offered 1,000 ways to die? The answers require us to go back before the movies, back before the novels, back to a time when the ocean was the most dangerous workplace on Earth, and the men who sailed it developed beliefs that modern minds can barely comprehend. The first written reference to Davy Jones's locker appears in print in 1726. A short piece in a London publication mentions Jones's locker as a place where drowned sailors go. But the phrase was clearly already in common use by then. Sailors did not learn it from a book. They learned it from other sailors, passed down through generations of men who lived and died at sea. 25 years later, in 1751, a Scottish author named Tobias Smollett published a novel called The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle. In this book, Smollett provides the first detailed description of Davy Jones himself. He describes a terrifying spirit of the deep with saucer eyes, 3 rows of teeth, horns sprouting from his head, a long tail, and blue smoke pouring from his nostrils. This was not a romantic figure. This was a demon, a monster that lurked beneath every wave, waiting to claim the souls of men who dared to cross his domain. Smollett was a former naval surgeon. He had spent years at sea. He knew what sailors believed, and he knew the stories they told each other during long night watches. His description of Davy Jones matches the oral tradition that had been circulating for decades, possibly longer. But where did the legend actually begin? 3 competing theories have emerged over the centuries, each with its own evidence. The first theory points to a real man named David Jones, a pub owner in London during the late 1500s and early 1600s. According to this account, Jones ran an establishment near the docks that catered to sailors on shore leave. But Jones had a side business. He would drug his customers, rendering them unconscious, then store their bodies in a back room, his locker. When ship captains needed crew members, Jones would sell them these unconscious men, who would wake up already at sea with no way to return home. This practice was called press ganging, and it was common enough that the British Navy eventually made it official policy. David Jones, if he existed, was simply more efficient than most. The second theory connects Davy Jones to the biblical story of Jonah. In the Old Testament, Jonah is swallowed by a great fish and spends 3 days in its belly before being vomited onto dry land. To Welsh sailors, who made up a significant portion of British crews in the 17th and 18th centuries, the name Jonah would have been pronounced differently. The corruption of Jonah to Jones through Welsh dialect is linguistically plausible, and the idea of being swallowed by the sea, trapped in the belly of the deep, fits perfectly with what Davy Jones's locker came to represent. The third theory is simpler and perhaps more tragic. It suggests that Duffer Jones was a real sailor, a man with notoriously poor eyesight who kept falling overboard during voyages. Each time, his shipmates would have to stop and rescue him. Eventually, the story goes, Duffer's luck ran out. He fell one final time, and they never found him. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened to careless men, and over time that cautionary tale evolved into something far more sinister. None of these theories can be proven definitively, and that uncertainty is itself significant, because the power of Davy Jones was never about historical accuracy. It was about what the legend represented. The name became a container for every fear that haunted men who worked on the water. But here is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because there was a real place in the Atlantic Ocean that sailors associated directly with Davy Jones. A place where ships actually disappeared. A place that seemed to confirm every terrifying story they had ever heard. The Sargasso Sea sits in the middle of the North Atlantic, bounded by 4 ocean currents that create a rotating gyre of still water. Unlike any other sea on Earth, the Sargasso has no land boundaries. It is defined entirely by the currents that surround it, and within those boundaries, conditions exist that nowhere else on the planet can match. The surface of the Sargasso is covered with floating mats of sargassum seaweed, a brown algae that can extend for miles in every direction. When sailing ships entered this region, they often found themselves becalmed. No wind, no current to carry them forward, just endless stretches of seaweed that seemed to grip their hulls like grasping hands. Ships could remain trapped in the Sargasso for weeks, sometimes longer. Crews ran out of fresh water, they ran out of food. Men began to die, and there was nowhere to bury them except over the side, into the same seaweed that held them captive. Stories emerged of ghost ships floating in the Sargasso, their entire crews dead, their cargo untouched, their logs ending in mid-sentence as the last survivor lost the strength to write. For sailors who survived passage through the Sargasso, the experience confirmed everything they believed about Davy Jones. Here was a place where the sea itself seemed malevolent, where ships went down not from storms or battles, but from the simple, terrible absence of any force to carry them forward. The Sargasso became a physical manifestation of the locker, a visible reminder that the ocean was not merely dangerous, but actively hostile to human life. The superstitions that developed among sailors were not casual beliefs. They were survival mechanisms, rituals designed to placate forces that could not be controlled. Never sail on a Friday. Friday was the day Christ was crucified, and beginning a voyage on that day invited disaster. Never whistle on deck. Whistling could summon storms, calling up winds that no ship could survive. Never rename a ship without a proper ceremony. The vessel had a spirit, and that spirit would resist being called by a name it did not recognize. Never kill an albatross. The great seabirds carried the souls of drowned sailors, and harming them brought the curse of those souls upon the ship. These beliefs were enforced by the sailors themselves. A man who broke these rules could find himself shunned by his crewmates, blamed for any misfortune that followed, even thrown overboard if conditions became desperate enough. The sea offered no forgiveness for those who offended Davy Jones. But the deepest fear, the one that underlaid all others, was the fear of what happened to a man who died at sea. In an age when Christian burial was considered essential for the soul's journey to heaven, drowning represented a fate worse than death itself. Your body sank to the bottom. No priest spoke words over your grave. No marker told future generations you had existed. Your remains were consumed by creatures of the deep, scattered across the ocean floor, impossible to recover. For the families left behind, there was an additional torture. When a ship failed to return, there was no confirmation of what had happened, no bodies to mourn, no graves to visit, just silence. Months would pass, then years, and eventually the families would have to accept that their husbands, fathers, and sons had gone to Davy Jones's locker. The phrase became a way of naming the unnameable, of giving form to a loss that had no physical evidence. Modern technology has finally allowed us to see what Davy Jones's locker actually looks like. Deep-sea exploration over the past 50 years has revealed the ocean floor in unprecedented detail. And what we have found confirms the scale of loss that sailors always suspected. There are an estimated 3 million shipwrecks resting on the bottom of the world's oceans. 3 million vessels that went down carrying cargo, crew, and passengers to depths that sunlight never reaches. The Atlantic alone contains hundreds of thousands of these wrecks, many of them from the golden age of sail when wooden ships crossed between Europe, Africa, and the Americas in pursuit of trade, slaves, and colonial expansion. What happens to a wooden ship at extreme depth depends on several factors. The cold temperatures of the deep ocean can preserve organic material remarkably well. The pressure, which increases by 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth, can crush some structures while leaving others intact. The absence of oxygen slows decomposition to a crawl. Some wrecks from the 17th and 18th centuries have been found with their hulls still recognizable, their cargo still in place, their crew's personal effects still waiting to be discovered. The human remains tell a harder story. Bodies on the surface would have been consumed by marine life within days. Bodies that sank with the ship would have decomposed more slowly, but eventually they too would disappear, leaving only the occasional bone, the occasional artifact, the occasional reminder that real people died in these places. Davy Jones's locker was never a single location. It was everywhere. Every spot on the ocean floor where a ship came to rest, every mile of water where a sailor drowned and sank, every place where the sea claimed another life and refused to give it back. The men who sailed these waters understood this in a way that we cannot fully grasp. They knew that every voyage could be their last. They knew that the ocean did not care whether they lived or died. And they knew that if the worst happened, their bodies would never be recovered, their families would never receive confirmation of their fate, and their souls, if the beliefs of their time held true, would never find peace. Davy Jones was the name they gave to this terror, a name for the unnamed, a face for the faceless depths that waited beneath every wave. And perhaps that was always the point. Perhaps the legend persisted not because sailors believed in a literal demon of the deep, but because they needed a way to speak about the unspeakable. They needed a villain they could curse, a figure they could blame, something more personal than the vast, indifferent ocean that surrounded them on every side. Today, we have GPS and satellite communication. We have rescue helicopters and life rafts with emergency beacons. We have weather forecasting that can predict storms days in advance. The ocean is still dangerous, but it is no longer the black void of uncertainty that it was 300 years ago. When a ship goes down now, we usually know where. We usually know why. We can usually recover the bodies. But 3 million wrecks still rest on the ocean floor. 3 million ships that went down before any of this technology existed. And for the men aboard those ships, Davy Jones's locker was not a legend. It was a destination, the final port for those who had no other harbor left. When a ship failed to return in the 17th or 18th century, the families onshore entered a particular kind of purgatory. They waited for news that never came. They hoped for survivors who never appeared. They listened for rumors, for secondhand accounts, for any scrap of information that might tell them what had happened to the men they loved. And eventually, when hope was exhausted, they had to accept the only explanation that remained. The ship had gone down. The men had drowned. They were in Davy Jones' locker now. There were no search and rescue operations. There were no investigations, no official reports, no closure of any kind. The ocean simply swallowed ships, and the ocean never gave them back. Families held memorials for men whose bodies lay thousands of miles away at depths no human could reach. They built empty graves and placed empty coffins in the ground, because there was nothing else to bury. The silence of the sea was absolute. This is why the legend of Davy Jones mattered. It gave form to the formless. It gave name to the nameless dead. It allowed sailors to speak about their deepest fear and families to understand where their loved ones had gone. Davy Jones's locker was never just a colorful phrase. It was a theology of loss, a way of making sense of senseless death, a final destination for men who had no other resting place. The ocean does not remember the men it has taken. It carries no markers, holds no memorials, keeps no records of the lives it has claimed. But we remember. We tell the stories. We speak the names. And perhaps that is all any of us can do for those who went down to Davy Jones's locker and never came back up.